Over here you'll see a download the starter kit, so I want you all to click on it. So the starter kit version 1.1.2 comes bundled with Ember version 1, handlebars, which is the templating engine for Ember, as well as jQuery 1.9. So the moment you have downloaded this, you will see something like this. Over here, this is the starter kit 1.1.2. I want you to go into the JS folder inside the libs folder and copy all the three dependencies. So we're going to do Control A, Control C, and we're going to go back to Expert Talks. So let's create a new project and call it Fire It Up with Ember. I have already created it, and I want you to go inside and say create a new folder. Let's just call it scripts and dump all our files here. So we are done. Now what we need to do next is create an HTML file. So let's go ahead and start up Sublime Text. I already have an instance open. So we are going to say File, Open Folder, and select Fire It Up with Ember. Now you see you have your entire folder structure which is visible on your left. So let's just go ahead, Control N, create a new file, Control S, and now we need to navigate to the particular location. So let's see, Drive, Projects, Expert Talks, Fire It Up with Ember, and we're going to call it index.html. Now you see that index.html has been added. So let's go ahead and add the HTML. So you have the HTML, the title is Fire It Up, and now we come to the body. The thing about views when it comes to Ember is that the entire view hierarchy is parsed using handlebars. So we need to define handlebars here. But before we get to that, let's just add all the scripts that we have defined. So I'm going to say script source and add the dependency for jQuery first. So I'll say jQuery. I'll go to my index and I'll paste it here, .js. Next up, we want handlebars because Ember internally depends upon handlebars, and the version is 1.0.0. And finally, the last dependency will be of Ember itself, Ember 1.1.2. With this setup, we have set up the basic dependencies that are needed to run this particular file. Now, the thing that you note here is that the order of the scripts is extremely important. Ember depends upon handlebars, which in turn depends upon jQuery, which means jQuery needs to be given first, then handlebars, and then ember.js. Now, whatever application scripts that you write, whatever JavaScript that you're going to implement specific to your application are going to come after ember.js because they are going to be internally dependent upon ember.js. But more about that later. So now what we're going to do is we are going to create our first ever template. Now the thing about creating templates is that you need to tell handlebars that this is a particular template. And how exactly do you tell handlebars? So we create a script tag, and instead of calling it as a type text JavaScript, we say it is a type text handlebars. And the moment you write something like text handlebars, handlebars internally knows that this is a script that I can parse. Now, keeping things very, very simple, what we are going to do is we are going to create a simple input button. So how do you create an input box? So obviously there is the conventional method where you write the HTML tag for input, but what we do want is we want handlebars to understand and parse this input box. So handlebars works on a syntax of curly braces. So you put two curly braces, you say input, and you say value equal to, let's just say, name, right? So what does this line mean? This line means that I want handlebars to process an input element whose value will be bound to something called as name. We don't know what that something is as of now. Let's see if we can do something with that. So let's create a span. This is the span, and inside the span we will say handlebars render name. So over here we learned two things. The first thing that we did learn was handlebars has the power of creating particular HTML elements in its own context, as you saw from the input. And similarly, the kind of value that we assign is parsable and readable by handlebars if we just put in the value. So let's try and fire it up, right? So we're going to say open in browser. We go, nothing happens. The reason why nothing happens is there are three errors. Errors being obviously our files are wrong. So we have to map the files correctly. And we try again. And then again we see that nothing has rendered. Now why is that? There's a very simple reason for it. So now we have actually defined a template and we have said that go here to create your template. This is the model that you are parsing. But we have in no way specified that this application is being managed by Ember. Ember does not know that Ember is supposed to manage this application. So how do we do that? So now we have to create a new file. So let's create a new file. I'm going to call it script. So this is going to be the core script of my application. I'm going to call it script.js, or for the sake of simplicity, let's just call it app.js. So now I have defined app.js, within which I will say, okay, fine, var application equal to ember dot application dot create. Writing this line lets Ember know that app is an Ember application. Let's add the dependency. So we say script text JavaScript source equal to scripts slash app.js. Let us run this. And you see that the text box has actually appeared. So what exactly happened here was the moment you specified that this application is a type of Ember application, Ember internally was able to pick up the application template from handlebars and render it accordingly. So let's try and input something into the input box. So let's just say my name. So my name is Abhimanyu. And you see that the moment I'm typing Abhimanyu, there is a particular text string which is also coming after Abhimanyu, right? What is happening here? What's happening here is that the value that is inside the text box is being auto-bound to the value that the span is displaying. If I were to change the span to display, hey, my name is name, and we see the output of this, and we say, hey, my name is, and I write Abhimanyu, and it renders Abhimanyu. So what is happening is that the input text box is putting all of its value into this model called as name, and the span is picking up this value from name and rendering it wherever we put the curly braces. So this is being done with the help of handlebars. Now a common question that a lot of you might actually come across is that how does handlebars know which template to parse? Well, the answer is really simple. When you create your first handlebars template, you see that if my template has no identification, as in it has no ID, I have not specified an ID over here, it basically means that this is a template for the root. For those of you from an ASP.NET background, it is somewhat like a master page. So what happens here is that I say that this is my application template, and this is a template that will be rendered throughout the application, and every page and every route that is rendered will always render this kind of a template. Hence, I need not specify or specifically tell Ember that this is my template and go ahead and parse this, right? So that was all that was about view. We will learn more about views and go more in depth about how we can deal with views and what all we can do in the workshop. For now, let's move on to models. So now let us look at the till now we have just created an application. We have said that app is equal to ember.application.create. Now, since the name says it is a model view controller, we have looked at the view. It's time for us to look at the model. Ember internally follows a very object-oriented approach when we talk of model. So everything which is defined inside Ember is essentially a class. And we can instantiate objects of the class. We have the concept of namespaces, there's a concept of inheritance, and we look at all of them. So let us continue from where we left off. We are going to create a class person. So let's just say app.person equal to ember.object.create, extend. And this becomes our definition of person class. What we have done here is essentially we have just said person is a type of Ember object. It inherits from Ember object. Let's define properties inside extend. So my properties are going to be first name, last name, date of birth, and say gender. Right? For now, let this be the amount of properties that are there in a person. Now let us go ahead and instantiate this particular class. And I'm going to say var person equal to app.person.create. And this is how I'm going to create an instance of the type person that we had defined earlier. So I'm going to say first name is Abhimanyu. The last name is Chakravarti. Now for date, I'm going to say just define it in a string. For example, I'm going to say 1/12/1988 and gender male. So with this, I have instantiated the class person with a set of default values. We already have the view in place. Let's try and bind this particular object model to this view. I'm going to keep the input value equal to name. So what I would want here is that I would want a set of div elements which will have a syntax like my name is name, in this case first name, and I'm going to copy paste all four of them and have them reflect the other properties. So there will be last name, there will be date of birth, and gender. Let me go ahead and change the property names here as well. So first name, last name, date of birth, and gender. Now let's try and run this. So we say open in browser and we see a lot of data has been displayed. Let's try and input something into the input box. Nothing happens. So what went wrong? Somehow all our bindings seem to have failed and nothing seems to work. What could be the possible reason? So now I'm going to comment out this particular field because it's no longer needed. The thing that has happened is that although we have defined a person variable, but we have not specified to Ember that I must use this person variable as a model for a particular view. I have an application view on one hand. I have defined something called as person, but I have not said that this person is essentially a model for my application view. So let us go ahead and do that. Following the kind of syntax that we have already described, I'm going to say app dot application route is equal to ember dot route dot extend. So once again, what I'm doing is I am extending the route object defined by Ember to create something called as an application route. Now anything that is prefixed with the term application is reserved. So application controller, application view, and application route are reserved words. They primarily refer to the root. The application view is the view that is associated with the root, which is the template that we wrote earlier over here, the one without the ID. The application controller is the controller for this view, and the application root is the root that is bound to this view. The model definition that we need to give needs to be defined inside here. So Ember route exposes a function called as model, in which we can return whatever model is bound. So let me just go ahead and extend that. So I'm going to say model is a function which will return person. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying that my application route has a model, and that model is returning me person. We have already defined person, and let us see now if it works. So we run it and we see that my first name is Abhimanyu, my last name is Chakravarti, my date of birth is 1/12/1988, and my gender is male, which means that my binding has very successfully worked. This being said, let us look at the properties in general. So obviously we notice that first name, last name, date of birth, and gender are the properties of the class. Now there are two things which make a client-side MVC, or for the fact of the matter any MVC framework, very unique, and that is the concept of computed and observable properties. What are computed properties? Computed properties are properties which depend upon other properties for their value, which basically means that if I have a certain value, I can compute something from it and create another property. Let's see an example of that. So we have the date of birth field here. Let me try and calculate the age. So I'm going to say that age is a function with a property dependency upon date of birth. So now I have created a property age which depends upon a property date of birth. And what do I do with this property age? Well, for this case, let me just say that I'm going to find 1988 and I'm going to convert it. I'm going to subtract the current year from it. Well, I can't do this right now. So let me just convert it into a new date. So I'm going to say var dob equal to new date this dot date of birth. Now obviously I need to put this into an mmddyy format or this will not work. So I will say mmddyy. Now what I want to return here is I want to return the value of today, which can be gotten by using new date, and the full year. The get full year on a new date will give me 2013. I'm going to subtract the dob dot get full year, which will give me the year of the date of birth, and will return this. And whenever the property of date of birth changes, my age will be calculated. So let me try and just bind this onto the handlebars template. So I will copy this and I will paste this, and I will say that my age is age. Let's see if this worked. So let me refresh this, and it says that my age is essentially an object. So we have an error. So what we did wrong here was, if you look at this error, it says that Ember object create no longer supports defining computed properties. So the thing that we did wrong was, we tried defining this property inside creating a particular object, which means in very simple English that whenever you're creating this particular object, I want you to define a computed property for this object. Sounds wrong, doesn't it? Because it is a property of the class. The class is defining what is the property which depends upon other property and how it should be computed. So let me just pick all of this up and put it where it belongs. So I just moved it from the instance declaration to the class declaration. And let's see if it works now. And it says that my age is 25, which is absolutely right. I am 25 years old. So the thing that we saw here was whenever you're defining computed properties, in the latest version of Ember at least, always define it wherever you are defining the class, because whoever now inherits and uses the class automatically will get that property. If I were to create another instance of the person class and call it by, say, any name, it would also get the age property, which is not doing any custom calculation based on whatever the value is. It is automatically calculating based on the date of birth field, which will differ for any person. So this was computed properties. Now, the thing about observable properties. So observable properties are properties which can be observed. So if you remember the first example that we did, where we had name and we had bound it to a particular field, so the name kept on changing. So let's try this. You remember the field that we had commented out, and we are going to say that the input value now refers to the first name. Let's see what happens when we do this. So we see that my input has already pre-populated itself with the value Abhimanyu. Let me go ahead and change this to Arjun. And you see that wherever my template was bound, the name now changes to Arjun. Let's try something a little more interesting. So let's bind date of birth. So I have bound date of birth. I refresh my page and I see that the date of birth has actually changed. Now I go ahead and I say that I was born in 1987 instead of 1988. The interesting thing to note here is that the moment I changed my value from 1988 to 1987, not only did the date of birth get updated, the age got updated as well, because the age as a computed property depends upon the date of birth property. And the date, in this case being an observable, is getting updated because I'm updating it from the input field. Pretty interesting, don't you think? So that was classes. Let us look at namespaces. So by very simple definition, if I am having a model called as person, well, what would be the namespace where I will put this model? Something called as models. So let me just try and go ahead and create a namespace. So I'm going to say app dot models equal to ember dot namespace dot create. So what did I do? I created a new namespace. So there is a pattern that you see here. The pattern is whenever you're instantiating something, you use a create, and whenever you're defining something, you do an extend. It is as simple as that. So let me go ahead and move my person into models. How do I do that? I just say app.models.person. And wherever I am using person, for example, on this line, I will say app.models.person. Well, will this work? Let's try it out. I refresh it. Everything works absolutely fine. Does this work? Yes. When I change the value, it changes the value all by itself. So the properties are computing, the properties are observable. We have encapsulated it inside a namespace. Now, when I started off, I actually spoke about object-oriented principles. And a lot of you might be wondering at this point of time that, okay, how about inheritance? That is an object-oriented principle. Do we cover that? Well, let's actually try it out. So let me create a subclass of said person, and I'm going to call it, well, developer. So I'm going to say apps.model.developer. Now I am defining something. So I will say app.models, dot person dot extend. And over here, I have basically created something like a developer. So let me go ahead and define a hello method. So I'm going to say hello is a function which depends upon the first name and it depends upon the last name, just to spice up things. And what does hello say? So in case of a person, hello says return hello, and I will append to it this dot first name, and I will append to that a space, and I will append to that the last name. So let me just go ahead and quickly check if this works. Oh, I forgot to bind it. So binding underway, and I'm not going to write anything here. I'm just going to say bind hello. Let's check it out. So hello Abhimanyu Chakravarti, it seems to work fine. Now I'm going to say that okay fine, Abhimanyu Chakravarti sounds like a developer to me. So I want to say hello Abhimanyu Chakravarti, or let me just go ahead and say hello developer, right? So I'm going to define a method called as hello, same syntax, again a property which depends upon first name and it depends upon last name. Notice that my developer does not have any definition of first name or last name. So what do I say here? I will say, oh, let me just copy this. I'll be faster, and I will paste this here. And I will say, instead of just saying hello, call me a hello developer. Let's see. So now the person that we had created earlier, let's call him a developer. So I'm going to say models.developer.create, and we're going to change nothing else, not even the model, not even the application route, and run this. The moment we run this, we realize that hello Abhimanyu Chakravarti has now all of a sudden changed to hello developer Abhimanyu Chakravarti, which means that I have access to my parent class's properties. Inheritance for you. But a lot of you might ask, okay, fine, can you access the base class? Well, let's try that out. So Ember very beautifully allows me to do that. So I will say this dot super, which will call the first name and the last name from its base class. Now what I want to do is I want to say that hello Abhimanyu Chakravarti, you seem like a developer, right? So let's see if this works. I mean, if this works, we know that pretty much everything else will work. So I'm going to run this and say hello Abhimanyu Chakravarti, you seem like a developer. So not only have I completed inheritance, not only does Ember allow me to have inheritance, it also allows me to actually invoke my parent class's members. That being said, is pretty much all that is to be covered when it comes to the model. Of course, we'll go in a little bit more detail once we get onto the hands-on and the workshop part of it. But for now, this is what the model is all about. So we have spoken about models, we've spoken about view. Now there is just one concept of any MVC framework that remains. We need to head towards controllers. And as we mentioned earlier, routers and controllers.